With Sam Darnold under center, the Seahawks don't have a quarterback controversy, at least at the starting position, but now there may very well be one on the depth chart. We'll be taking a deep dive into Drew Lock's return and what it means for the Seahawks at quarterback. Up next here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on a Blue Friday night edition with my co-host, Nick Lee. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're tuning in from Union, Washington, or Kamloops, British Columbia. We appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We are getting close to the draft, but we have to take a little bit of a hiatus from that, at least till later in the show, because the Seahawks decided to make some waves with a free agent signing at the quarterback position today, and it's a familiar name. We'll be discussing what Drew Lock returning means for the Seahawks and their draft plans, as well as the depth chart. And then we'll get to our all underrated draft prospects defensive squads. And then we'll be ranking the 5 players that we think are the best overall fits from the official 30 visits for the Seahawks to draft later this month. This episode is brought your way courtesy of our friends over at Nissan and the all-new Nissan Armada. Stay tuned for the Armada Player of the Week later in the show. Now for your lead story here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. The Seahawks don't have a quarterback controversy atop the depth chart. Sam Darnold is obviously going to be the starter replacing Geno Smith, but there may very well now be a controversy behind him as a familiar face is coming back after a year in New York. Drew Lock signing a 2-year, $5 million deal to come back to the Seahawks after one season away. He won't be backing up Geno Smith this time, but Nick, look, this is just reading between the tea leaves for me. And obviously, we have to see what the guaranteed money is on this contract before we can jump to any conclusions. But the fact that this is not a 1-year deal and it is a 2-year contract, that screams to me that this is a really bad development for Sam Howell, who was in the last year of his deal, did not play well last year on the practice field or in the limited game action. 37% completion percentage, actually 35.7. So it was actually worse than I just said. It was an awful performance coming in for Smith in Green Bay in that Sunday night loss to the Packers. This feels to me, obviously John Schneider has been a big fan of Drew Lock dating back to his time at Missouri. They had interest in potentially drafting him to maybe be the successor to Russell Wilson back in the day. And Denver ended up taking him. This feels, and maybe you can chime in and disagree with me a little bit here, but this really feels like Sam Howell's already got a foot out the door because Seattle doesn't keep 3 quarterbacks normally. And this contract with being a 2-year deal, $5 million, and I guarantee a good portion of it is going to be guaranteed because of the respect between the two sides. This seems to me like the Seahawks are saying, no, we saw enough. And that doesn't mean that Sam Howell can't be here to compete because he's got a $1.1 million cap hit. It's not like he's expensive, but this feels like this is a really bad omen for Sam Howell.
The only thing I really disagree with that you said was using the word controversy for backup quarterback. I don't think there's a controversy anymore. I think Drew Lock comes in here and is the backup quarterback. Clearly, there's a positive history between the two. It's certainly going to be interesting to see what they can do, what they can get for Sam Howell. I think really getting anything for Sam Howell at this point in a possible draft would be a win. But like you mentioned, the 2-year deal up to $5 million. You don't pay a guy like that. You don't give a guy that kind of deal without probably some sort of, not guarantees, but certainly there's some understandings that they're probably going to make him the backup quarterback. And yeah, Drew Lock's been there, done that as far as being a backup. I was there in the game against the Eagles where that just an incredible game of that pass he had to Jackson Smith and Jigba in the corner of the end zone. That was just a way fun atmosphere to be at. Clearly, the players like him. Like clearly, there's he's got this every guy's guy kind of reputation. And yes, he went to New York last year. Started 5 games, didn't go great, but not a lot went great for the Giants last year. I'm not sure we can pin all that on Drew Lock. 59.1% completion percentage. But you know what? That's a lot better than 30 whatever you said for that was almost double.
35.7. Yeah.
Oh, that was bad. That was probably that outing he had, that Sam Howell had, was one of the worst quarterback appearances I have ever seen in the NFL, which is saying a lot. And really, I think this signing is kind of punting on Sam Howell. Whether that means they just straight up release him, like you said, there's a minimal cap hit. There is one though, or they can find a possible trade partner. Either way, I don't really see this as a controversy anymore. I think this is Drew Lock's job to back up Sam Darnold.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. I know a lot of 12s out there are talking about, oh no, is this going to mean there's a competition? Look, I could see this playing out like Geno Smith against Drew Lock, where it was said that it was a competition, but any of us that were there, they never felt like a competition. It was Geno Smith's job to lose. I think that you're in the same situation here. And because you traded for Sam Howell, you could actually cut him and you have no dead cap hit there. 1.1 million opened up. That's not a ton of cap space, but it's something. And they liked what they saw from Jaren Hall last season, and he was their emergency third quarterback the last few games. So you have him on the roster too. The thing that I'm going to push back against, I would certainly not push back against the idea that Howell's in trouble, because you and I are in full agreement there. Like, maybe he should have his bags packed already, because maybe a team like the Vikings that needs a backup quarterback now, maybe you can get a conditional pick in 2026 for him if he makes the roster or whatever. That's your best bet probably right now, because there's not going to be much of a market, especially with the draft coming up. But what I will push back against is the idea that this changes Seattle's chances of drafting a QB, because I don't think that it's any less now than it was before this move is made. Because this is my viewpoint here, Nick. Seattle is in a position where John Schneider's not going to reach for a QB. But if there's somebody that he really likes that falls into day 3, preferably, you've got 10 picks. There's nothing wrong with taking a shot on a QB at that stage. And then you could maybe justify having a third quarterback on the roster if he's under club control for 4 years and you can develop him, but you don't necessarily want him to be your backup right away. And maybe he comes in and outplays Drew Lock, and Drew Lock's contract's bigger than some backups, but you could still move on if you needed to, or trade him if somebody's got an injury. I just don't think that this necessarily changes the pathway to getting a quarterback, because I didn't think it was a high likelihood anyway. But I don't think that Drew Lock is going to suddenly make it, end all be all. There's no way they're drafting a QB. I still think it's probably low odds, but I don't think that this move changes that as much as it just makes it much tougher for Sam Howell to be on this roster in 2025.
And I still be surprised if the Seahawks do keep all 10 picks, but say they do, or there's a world where they're forced to use all 10 picks and not make any trades, then yeah, like you said, I get, Tyler Shupp or a flyer on Dylan Gabriel in day 3 or something like that. Obviously nothing super, up there first 2 days. I think this probably takes, Sam Darnold probably did that too, but this probably takes them out of the Sam Darnold in the first round hype train, which did have a little steam there for a bit in Seattle. I think that's probably dead and gone. But yeah, like you mentioned, especially with some of the newer rules with third quarterbacks and that appeal of having a rookie on a 4-year deal that's pretty minimal. And yeah, maybe you mess around and he's all of a sudden a lot better than Drew Lock. And I think there is a significant underlying story. And yeah, you want a guy that backs up Sam Darnold as a guy who is experienced, who has those, has that, all right, kid, you're in, Sam Darnold's on his back there and he's going to have to come out. And Drew Lock has been there. Drew Lock knows what that feels like, where if it's week 2 and Sam Darnold takes a hit and you want to throw in, I don't know, Dylan Gabriel, you feeling great about that? Probably not. So there probably is a little bit of, we need a guy back here that is better than Sam Howell. But also, if a rookie comes in and competes, there could be maybe an iron sharpens iron in the backup realm between Locke and a rookie where that pays off. Maybe not in 2025, but later on.
There's some irony to this because we remember when Drew Lock was in Denver that one of the biggest issues, and he even did the summit practice with the Seahawks, one of the biggest issues with him is that he had these untimely interceptions, and sometimes he would get greedy and try to squeeze the ball into double and triple coverage. Sam Howell was that way in training camp, and when he checked in last year in that game. Now the Seahawks are clearly saying, you know what? We've seen Drew Lock go win a game against the Philadelphia Eagles. He played well in San Francisco, the other start that he had, given circumstances. We are much more confident that Drew Lock can come in and make good decisions and not turn over the football the way that Sam Howell was doing in training camp and in that game. He could have had 3 picks in that game against Green Bay. He was more accurate throwing to them than he was the Seahawks receivers in that game. So, look, this to me, that's the other reason I feel like this is not a good omen for Sam Howell, because you're basically saying, look, we've already had this guy as our backup, and we're bringing him back because we saw what you did last year, and we're not sold at this point. And look, I don't think fans should be upset about the trade they made. You swapped a couple picks. It was worth taking the shot, but I think that they have seen enough to this point. And Drew Lock has a lot of traits that I think Clint Kubiak is looking for at quarterback. And the trustworthiness factor, he really grew there in his time in Seattle. And now coming back, I think it's a good fit for both sides. When we come back, we're going to shift back to draft talk. The Seahawks have now had 12 reported top 30 visits. There's probably been more to this point that haven't been reported, but we're going to rank our top 5 players in terms of ideal Seahawks draft picks from their 30 visits. That'll be coming up next here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. The Armada Player of the Week is brought to you by our friends over at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, we're taking a look at our draft prospects to pick one guy that stands apart from the rest, the guy we believe showcases the strength and power needed to push the Seahawks forward as we look ahead to the 2025 season. This week's Armada clear-cut Player of the Week is Tate Ratledge, guard from Georgia, boasting toughness both in his play style and his impressive flowing mullet. The all-SEC performer dominated opponents in the trenches and would instantly boost Seattle's maligned interior offensive line, offering the heavy-duty toughness and confidence that comes with the all-new Nissan Armada. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what I think Tate Ratledge can do for the Seahawks offensive line. It's clear our Player of the Week is out there ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can count on with the all-new Nissan Armada or any of their outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined for tonight's show by my co-host, Nick Lee, and a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. We are now inside 2 weeks until the draft. I mean, you blink, Nick, it's going to be Thursday night in Green Bay, and we are going to have 10 picks, potentially more, for the Seattle Seahawks in the 3-day festivities. We're getting closer. Let's talk official 30 visits. There's been 12 reported so far. Some of these players maybe are more day 3 types or undrafted free agent types, but what you and I have been tasked with doing, you and I are going to rank our top 5 Seahawks prospects from this year's official 30, and we're going to base it off 3 factors. 1, the realism of that player landing in Seattle. Like if they had an interview with Abdul Carter and he was on a top 30, I would say that is not happening because the Seahawks are not going to be in a position to draft him. So reality, is it realistic they can get that player? 2, overall talent and positional need. And then 3, schematic fit. So those are the factors that we are considering here. Nick, I'm going to give you the mic first. Looking at these visits, the 12 players that have been reported so far, who stands out as the best when we're looking at personnel fit, talent, need on the roster and reality of that player being picked by the Seahawks?
Well, the guy that first stands out that he probably could have gotten high first round buzz without an injury is Siobhan Revell out of ECU. I mean, oh my gosh. Talk about just oozing with the tools and the talent. He's got man coverage skills for days. He's got zone coverage skills for days, length for days, everything for days. Unfortunately, except for full health right now. And like I've been kind of hammering home most off season is cornerback is a pretty big need. If you kind of peep under the hood with Reek Woolen last year of his contract, even Kobe Bryant, who's now a safety, last year of his contract, Josh Jobe, 1 year contract. And, you go down the line, besides Devin Witherspoon, of course, is the alpha, and who's going to be there at least for a few more years under that contract as a rookie. Revell is could be that absolute dog opposite him, either as a hedge if you lose Woolen, or if you want to re-sign Woolen, that's a heck of a trio. That is probably the most talented trio of cornerbacks in any singular secondary in football. And then, of course, after him, Nicky Manwari. I mean, that would be, he's talking about physical freaks. He won the combine, but again, he's not just a combine merchant. He had really nice numbers. One of the better coverage grades of any prospect coming out. And he bounced all over the secondary, had 150 snaps at slot, over 400 snaps in the box, almost 200 snaps as a center fielder free safety. And he's got all the physical tools you want in a safety. You could bounce him really anywhere in the secondary. So both of these are kind of one and the same with Revell and Manwari, where, they're secondary players that if you peep under the hood, there's a lot of needs in the secondary for the Seahawks and certainly post 2025. So those two in the secondary, then I'll just finish with my third one is Michael Williams, the edge out of Georgia. I know he was getting some pretty high buzz early on. I feel like that's kind of the steam is kind of running a little bit with some of the hype. I was even seeing top 10 and some picks with him early in the draft season. Still pretty solid run defender. I think he's a better run defender than he is a pass rusher, but certainly with other pieces that the Seahawks have at the edge position, that's not a terrible thing. So those three, I think, would be the top three for me of those visits.
Yeah, you and I are on the same tangent with the first two, except I have them swapped because to me, Nick Manwari is one of the top 5 or 6 talents in this draft. I don't know that he goes in the top 10 because of the position that he plays. Honestly, safety is a spot that you don't see a lot of safeties get picked in the top 10. Maybe this year it ends up happening. I could see somebody like Chicago taking a stab at him at pick number 10 because he is a fantastic football player. But we hear Mike Macdonald use the term force multiplier a lot. That is one of his favorite phrases in press conferences, radio interviews. I'm sure he uses it with his players all the time. That's one of his go-tos, chasing edges and force multipliers. Those are the two things I've heard him say the most. And look, this kid is as much of a force multiplier as any defender in this class. You mentioned the positional versatility. He can be an extra linebacker in the box. He's 6'3", 220. He's very physical. He likes to hit people. Not as hard of a hitter as Cam Chancellor was, but he's a much more athletic player than Cam Chancellor. We're talking low 4.3 speed, 42.5-inch vertical jump, which is just insane. He had 2 pick sixes last year against SEC competition, so he's got ball hawking skills. I think there's a blitzer in there. They just didn't do it much with South Carolina. To me, if that kid is there at 18, that best player available, you got to go that route. And I don't care how well Kobe Bryant played last year. You can play 3 safeties regularly in this defense. And Nick Manwari gives you a ton of flexibility. And then I've got Siobhan Revell at number 2 on my list because of the injury that he had. But like you said, if he wouldn't have torn his ACL in the practice field last year, I don't even think that we're having a discussion about him being available at 18 because he might have been the first corner that was off the board not named Travis Hunter. And Travis Hunter might be picked as a receiver more than a corner. He's just an absolute freak. But in terms of pure corners away from Travis Hunter, Siobhan Revell, he is a specimen too. 6'3", 200 pounds, long arms. He does not look like a typical NFL corner. He looks like Richard Sherman that has been in the weight room a lot more. I mean, and he is fast too. I think he would have ran in the 4.3s if he was healthy. So Revell is a guy. 18 might be a little rich for a guy coming off that injury, but if his medicals have checked out, he is well worth that pick. He's that kind of a player. And coming in at number 3 on my list, this is where you and I go in a little different direction. Ty Robinson from Nebraska. I think you can make a very strong argument in terms of scheme fit on defense. There might not be a better prospect for a Mike Macdonald defense than Ty Robinson. And I know you've watched some Big Ten football. I turned on the TV to watch Nebraska a couple times last September, and I just kept saying, who is this number 9? Because he just kept destroying every play. He ended the year with 7 sacks. It was a big jump from his previous production. But his film the previous couple years was solid. You just didn't have the sack numbers. But he is just an absolute menace in the trenches. Plays with physicality, blue collar, nasty, plays to the whistle. A lot of times beyond the whistle. He is the kind of guy, though, that Mike Macdonald loves because he's played 1 tech. I think in the NFL, it's going to be tough for him to do maybe on third downs, but he can play 3 tech. He can play 5 tech. You can stand him up outside and wide 9, and he's athletic enough. He ran a 4.88 40 at almost 290 pounds. He is a fantastic football player. He's a leader. I mean, if you wear a single-digit number for a Matt Rule coach team at the college level, you check off the leadership. That's why you get that single-digit number. It is a sign of respect from the coach. Ty Robinson is a guy, even at pick 50 or pick 52, if Seattle took him there, I would love that pick because I just think he is a home run schematically, and just the way he carries himself would fit in with what Mike Macdonald wants on his defense.
Yeah, I could have put Robinson on here. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about him later. I'm also a Robinson fan. Just thinking of other things as far as fit goes and need. Mason Taylor, I'm a big Mason Taylor fan. I just think he's really athletic, strong tight end, and kind of your modern tight end. He's got, I think it was 4.65 40. In the pro days, 6'5", just over 250. So your ideal size. Put up some numbers at LSU, over 500 receiving yards last year. And doesn't drop the football, has a really good non-drop rate. So it would be a really nice compliment to Barner. And again, talk about peeping under the hood. Tight end is going to be a need as well. And Savion Williams out of TCU, I know the low-hanging fruit is that, he's just Quentin Johnson, the big, tall receiver out of TCU who keeps dropping the football. But I think there's more to him than that. I think he's a more overall athlete than Johnston. He's got the length, of course, and the size, the hands. But I think there's a bit more wiggle, more top off the defense kind of skill set with Savion Williams. But also, it's just, you don't have to. There's nothing in the rule book that says he just has to be an X receiver. Just toss him out there. You can toss him all over the place, be a returner. His skill set is there for you to use.
Yeah, and he's going to top off my list at number 5 too. At number 4, though, I got Jared Wilson, the center from Georgia, and part of the reason behind this, Nick, and we're going to be talking centers next week for our preview, it might be the shortest episode of Locked On Seahawks we've ever done because I am not kidding. I think center is the worst position in this draft class, and I would even say fullback is better. That is how far I would go there because there's Jared Wilson, who to me is the only center that is worth consideration in the first 3 rounds because he's a really good athlete. In a zone blocking scheme, he's young. I think this is a guy that could really blossom in that scheme. But I have some strength concerns with him. Still, if Seattle's going to look for a center that can really thrive athletically, that he's going to be able to fit in Kubiak's system, then Jared Wilson is a guy that would make a lot of sense. But as we'll talk about next week, you can make an argument after that when you get into day 3, it's just a lot of, it is not a fun position group. There are more fullback candidates in this class that I'm excited about than centers from this group. It's so bad that you start looking at guards that have never played center. Can he play center? Because I don't trust any of these guys on day 3. So I've got Jared Wilson at 4, and I've got Savion Williams, at number 5 because he can run the football too. I see Cordarrelle Patterson 2.0. He had over 300 rushing yards for TCU last year. He's a dynamic kick and punt returner. He is so inconsistent as a receiver. He'll drop easy passes, and then he'll turn around and make a highlight reel grab that looks like Odell Beckham-ish. So can you just find a way to get him to be more consistent? Because if you can, with the other things he brings to the table, he's got a chance to be one heck of a gadget weapon in Clint Kubiak's offense. When we come back, we are going to shift gears to the defensive side of the ball. We've got our all underrated defensive squads. Nick's going to be teaming up with me. The two of us are going to dish out our own defensive squads. I did offense earlier in our Wednesday show. We're going to get to the defensive all underrated squads coming up next year on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm Corbin Smith. He's Nick Lee. A special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Inside 2 weeks until the NFL draft in Green Bay, we are going to wrap up our all underrated squads. I dished out my all underrated offensive prospects on Wednesday. Nick, today it is all about defense. And I know that there are some players that you and I have not had much of a chance to talk about to this point that we are fired up to talk about on the defense side of the football, who are really under the radar going into this draft process. And we're going to start with the defensive line and linebackers.
Well, I'll start off like we mentioned with Ty Robinson. I think that's maybe underrated. Isn't the isn't the word anymore. I think he'd be a great fit here. Probably should have been in my top 5 as far as visits go. 6'5", 85th percentile for broad jump, explosive first move, just the ultimate bull rusher. I mean, if you looked up bull rusher in the dictionary, I think a picture of Ty Robinson is somewhere nearby. Just a solid defensive lineman. And does that play strength can translate in the NFL? We'll see, but he'd be great. Then next to him in the interior, Joshua Farmer, I continue to just grow on as well. 87th percentile for broad jump, so he's got that explosive. He complements that with really heavy hands, a heavy anchor. He's pretty good in the run game. Bounced all over the defensive line for an up and down Florida State team, but we won't go there. And on the edges, we have two different walks of life. R.J. Oben out of Notre Dame and David Walker from the FCS ranks. So first, R.J. Oben. Hard to have a guy who's the son of an NFL player be in the underrated list, but it's just not as viewed as one of those top, edge kind of prospects. 6'3", 82-inch wingspan. It's hard to beat that. Definitely the size you want. Really good pass rush, win rate, winning program, winning player. Just doesn't. He's kind of one of those guys who probably has a higher floor but a lower ceiling than some of the other guys that you're looking at in the first couple rounds of the draft. David Walker, Central Arkansas, I believe. He's got the coveted title of being part of Bruce Feldman's freak list. I always love diving into that. And so he's on the freak list. And if you're on the freak list, you should deserve a look for sure. So with that, he's dominated the FCS. The Buck Buchanan Award winner, which is they give it to the top FCS defender, performed well in the Senior Bowl. So those guys, that rounds out my defensive line. Then I have 2 linebackers. Cody Simon, speaking of winning programs, national champion, had 112 total tackles for the Ohio State Buckeyes. Solid run grade. I love that he's pretty much built like, he runs like a safety, built like a linebacker. He runs in the 4.5s, sideline to sideline. Natural run defender. If you're looking for a guy to add to become a plus run defender, Cody Simon could be a guy like that. And then Sean Dolak is a guy that out of Buffalo, led the FBS with 168 total tackles, 19 tackles for loss, 7th in FBS, 6'9", 3-cone drill. I mean, 81st percentile. He's got some measurables there. He went from walk-on to All-American, which you love stories like that. And he's got a little bit of Ben Burke-Kirven vibes where he's got the gaudy tackle numbers, high football IQ, high effort, high motor, maybe not top-end athleticism, but a guy that you could probably find a spot for. So those are my 2 linebackers.
Yeah, those are both really good picks that were on my short list. Now, getting to my all underrated top front 6 here, I went in some different directions here. Now, I certainly would have considered Ty Robinson, but at this point, I feel like he's not underrated. There's a lot of talk about him going early on day 2 at this point. For my defensive line, I kind of introduced this guy when we were looking at our edges earlier in the week. K'Mon Rucker from North Carolina. He's short, kind of sawed off. He's 6'1", 254 pounds, but he had 8 sacks 2 years ago. He's been inconsistent with the sack production, but he's got a high motor. And this guy, Mac Brown, former North Carolina coach, just raved about his leadership skills. This was a guy that was renowned in the locker room. I just think he checks off so many boxes. And I look at him as a guy that is selfless. He will play special teams in the NFL and he will do fine. I think of the new kickoff, we can have bigger guys doing it. I think he will be a monster on kick coverage in today's modern NFL. I think Rucker is a guy that makes a lot of sense for the Seahawks. And at the other edge position, I'm going, and listen, it's like when you pick BYU guys. When I pick Boise State players, of course, people are going to say, you're being a homer. But Ahmed Hassani, if you watch Boise State, obviously you were looking at Ashton Genty, but I could never keep my eyes off of Hassani when I watch Boise State games because the guy, first off, he is a former CrossFit athlete that had never played football until he came over to Boise State. And they just kind of had to teach him with training wheels how to play. And by his second full season, he had double-digit sacks. Like, I don't care that his testing was not great. When I watch him on film, he just plays like his hair's on fire all the time. Relentless effort guy, can defend the run, and he's still learning the game. I mean, he's only played for 4 years. I think a late round flyer on this kid would make a ton of sense because I think if you can keep developing him, there's starter potential in this kid. And then in the interior, got two totally different style players. Patrick Jenkins from Tulane. He is under 290 pounds. He is a pass rusher with athleticism for days. Had some really good sack numbers at Tulane. A player that had a high pressure rate the last 2 years. And has kind of been hovering under the radar. You look at the film, and you're like, this guy at midday 3 makes a lot of sense. And I think he's hovering under the radar because it's just such a deep defensive line class. Patrick Jenkins would be much more noteworthy in most classes, but this one, he's just kind of an afterthought, but he's a really good player. And then Yahya Black, he's that run-stuffing nose tackle that isn't going to give you a ton of pass rushing production, but he is a big man. He's hard to move. He's a decent athlete for a player of his size. And I just like Iowa players coming in the league. Speaking of that, he's not the only Iowa Hawkeye I have on my list here. Jay Higgins, and I'll be honest, when I looked at Jay Higgins' stats from a couple years ago and then I turned on the film, his 2023 tape I was not overly impressed with, even though he had a ton of tackles. This year I left with a different vibe watching games. I saw a guy that was much more decisive, getting downhill. A lot more of his tackles were impact tackles. And this guy just racks up a ton of stops. He plays much faster than his unimpressive 40 time and testing results. He just plays faster in pads. Higgins in day 3 is a player that I think can absolutely make plays for you in the NFL. And I think he'll fit in just fine on special teams. And Cody Lindenberg filling out my front 6 for Minnesota, another guy that just makes plays. Maybe not the best athlete, but he went to Mobile, had a great week at the Senior Bowl, 240 pounds. So he's a bigger bodied guy, has a little more athleticism than Jay Higgins, very high IQ football wise. Both these players are guys that could eventually find a way in the lineup, and they could push Tyrese Knight at that other linebacker spot, and they're hovering under the radar in this class. Let's go to the secondary real quick, Nick, and you and I picked 2 linebackers apiece because, hey, it's the modern NFL. Nickel is king. We're going to have 5 defensive backs apiece.
Yeah, and I'll first start with, the Seahawks, hit pretty nicely on a really long, toolsy kind of corner from UTSA. Let's go there again. Let's draw from that well again. Zay Frazier out of UTSA, 6'3". His physical traits are off the charts again. Not quite to the elite levels of Woolen out of UTSA, but 82.5 coverage grade, 82.1 run defense grade. And he's got a really good missed tackle rate or a low missed tackle rate. So he's kind of I think he's more polished overall cornerback prospect than Woolen was coming out. Maybe not the top end physical talent as Woolen, but maybe a bit more of a polished product. And then Noah Williams out of Cal. The size might not be there, but he's got the toughness. He competes. He's got the ball hawking. So what he might lack up for in pure athleticism, I think he's got the IQ, Cal guy. And also just a solid, he's a football player. He makes those plays. He makes solid plays all over the field. And then a guy that I watched a lot the last few years is Kobe Bryant. And it would be kind of humorous to have the monopoly on Kobe Bryant's in the NFL. Let's have the monopoly on Kobe Bryant. So Kansas is Kobe Bryant at the corner. well, he's a bit undersized. He's 6 foot, but he's pretty thin. But he's got, just talk about ball hawk. I think he's one of the better ball hawks maybe in the country last 2 years. He has 8 interceptions total in the last 2 years. Watched a lot of him in the Big 12. Maybe a little undersized, but still just got that heart and that IQ and the ball hawking ability that might make up for it. And then my safeties quickly. Keaton Crawford out of Nevada has just uber athleticism, 4'4", 140, tested really, really well. And Billy Bowman out of Oklahoma, also pretty, bounced around the defense. He doesn't have to just be your center field safety, but a little undersized too. But those two I might be talking about maybe playmakers on special teams more than like your starting safety. But these guys, obviously we're not saying the Seahawks should overdraft for these guys, but these guys could fit nicely with the right slot and maybe a few slots higher than some might have them, just with some of the value the Seahawks could find in them.
And listen, I love that you pointing that out because, look, some of our listeners are saying no names. These guys are no names. That's part of the exercise here.
Exactly.
We're trying to dig up good players that aren't being talked about. And listen, I know when you and I did this last year, there were a few guys that we talked about that ended up getting picked late in the draft by the Seahawks. So some of these guys, and Jarek Reed, the year he was picked, Rob and I talked about him on our all underrated team. Like, some of these guys are hovering under the radar for fans and media analysts, but they're not for NFL teams. So we're looking for those guys. That's what this all underrated team is all about. We're looking for the guys that are really productive and talented that just aren't getting talked about.
Yeah, you're mining for gold. You're just mining.
Yeah, that's exactly what you're doing. And as far as me mining for gold in the secondary, at the cornerback position, Jacob Parrish from Kansas State, outstanding athlete, had 4 interceptions a couple years ago. His numbers were not as good this season, and he gave up some big plays. But another player that's really high IQ. He gets his hands on the football, has some work to do technique-wise tackling, but it's not an effort issue. And I think he'd come in and be a special team stud right away. Jabbar Muhammad from Oregon, who played previously at Washington. Husky fans know him well. That dude might be small, but he gets his hands on the football. He led slot corners and pass breakups 2 years ago. The guy just gets his hands on the ball. He's always around the football. He has the side-to-side quickness to be able to do the two-way goes out of the slot, and he'll come up and hit people. So I really like him as a slot cornerback. And Dorian Strong, this is a guy that could go in day 2. And as we mentioned, mostly these are day 3 or undrafted guys. But I'm mentioning Dorian Strong here because I've looked in some draft boards where he's listed as a 6th or 7th round pick. If you've watched Virginia Tech play the last couple years, number 44 jumps off the tape. And I love the physicality. I love the way he plays the game. When I was talking to people at the combine, they were like, this is a kid that nobody's talking about that they should be. NFL teams like him. Dorian Strong is a outstanding football player that isn't getting talked about enough. So he is on my list. As far as the safeties go here, real quick, Maxon Hook from Toledo. I actually have 3 guys on Toledo's roster that I think deserve to be drafted. We talked about Torres, the tight end, a couple of days ago in my all underrated offensive, and obviously Darius Alexander. He might go end of round 1. Teams love that kid. Maxon Hook is a playmaker. He's had a bunch of interceptions in his 5 years that he was at Toledo. The first year he didn't play much, but he has had a bunch of picks. He's got great ball production. I've been watching this kid since he played at New Palestine in Indianapolis area. He is a hard hitter. He flies over the field, can play inside. He can play center field. Had a solid week at the Senior Bowl. Maxon Hook's a name to watch. And then Malik Verdon, if you're looking for an under-the-radar, big-bodied safety. He's 6'3", massive guy. Isn't the athlete that somebody like Nick Emanuwari is. But if you're looking for a money linebacker that come up and stick people and play special teams, Malik Verdon is that guy that you can get 6th, 7th round, maybe even as an undrafted free agent that was very productive on a solid Iowa State football team last year. As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Nick at NickLee51. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we return on Monday, Rob and I are going to be talking centers. And as I mentioned, it might be kind of an interesting episode because, well, we might be really reaching to find some centers to talk about in that segment as we head towards the 2024 or 2025 NFL draft. Make sure that you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Go Hawks.